Okay, we come to the Skuas, a lifelong passion to find a South Polar. Stunning photo by Phil Palmer of a South Polar Skua. Now let's get straight into it. Bonksies, or great skuas as they pass our shores, can be aged. This is a stunning juvenile bonksy or great skua, identified by its little hood here. And this rather uniform, beautiful copper colouring, and all the coppery underwing surfaces. This is a nice, bright, paler, easy juvenile great skua. Here's a darker juvenile great skua. The wings look very plain, but it still has these little subterminal cinnamony markings up in the mantle feathers and a hooded effect. You can also see the pale bill base there, but a tricky one if you don't get a good view. Here's another dark juvenile bonksy or great skua. You see the pale subterminal markings in the scapula and pale fringes to the wing coverts there. Here's a first calendar year great skua in the autumn, or it's a year old basically, by Gary Thoburn. And typically of 1 year old great skuas, they can have pretty plain looking upper wings, and you can see that it's not a juvenile because it's also molting, whereas the juvenile is very fresh. There's no all the feathers are the same age. Here on this 1 year old, it's just finishing its first primary molt, but they still have, as in Ray's illustration, pale markings over around the hind neck and across the mantle. Now here's another bird that's probably a 1 year old. It's in mid-wing molt, and it's got pale markings all over here, and it's even got some pale markings at the leading edge of the wing. Another one that's probably a yearling. Overall in the field, pretty plain upper wings. Again, a year old great skua. You can finish its primary molt here. It's in secondary molt here. And it's just starting the flowery underparts that it will increase as it gets older. Also, year-olds often quite a hooded appearance. And here's another one that's probably a year-old. Again, the typical pattern, plain wings, but pale markings across the scapulas and mantle feathers. And then South Polar. 2CY, second calendar year, or a year old plus South Polar. Like the great skua of a similar age, although it's hatched 6 months earlier. Look at these plain dark outer wings, but there's no pale markings over the mantle and the scapular region. Another on the water there. By one Sagadia. Again, very plain upper parts. Great skuas just never really have this pattern. Whether in juveniles, great skuas have little subterminal crescents that are gingery or pale or rusty coloured, and then from there on they start to get streaks and spots and flowery marks. See how plain the South Polar is. Debunking a few old myths, another South Polar. Brownish, not blackish under wing coverts, but otherwise this one's a South Polar. Here's a great skua by Steve Race, Yorkshire Coast Nature. Pale noseband, used to call it as a feature of South Polar. It isn't. This is a fairly straightforward great skua. Look how kind of flowery patterned it is. And one of the key things is understanding how great skuas change from this juvenile plumage. It's all fresh, with lots of little cinnamon marks, right through to these adults that are covered in streaks and spots and flowery plumage, and the stages in between just build up to that. Another great skua or bonksy, this one on Shetland, covered in pale marks all over. Bit more hooded this adult, but otherwise again the same sort of typical markings. Great skua in early August. It's molted its secondaries, and now it'll start on its primary molt for the autumn. You're not going to mistake all that pale marking with any kind of South Polar. Another great skua in early August. This one missing 2 or 3 inner primaries. You used to think that was a feature of South Polar, where they'd molt several primaries at once. In fact, it isn't. There's nothing odd for great skua about it as well. Look at the beautiful rust colouring on this adult great skua in mid to late summer. And again, in flight, the older they are, the more markings they get in the wings and pale stuff going on all over the under part and upper part plumage, and some become really pale. And at a distance, these can kind of mimic a pale morph South Polar skua, but they're really not the same. In fact, we're unlikely to get pale morph South Polars in the North Atlantic. Now then, thanks to Dick Newell's website and these pictures posted there, here are 3 British candidates for South Polar. And I think that is, with hindsight and learning, that's obviously what they are. This one's in Glamorgan in South Wales, the South Polar skua. This one's on the Isles of... oh no, this is the Glamorgan bird as well. Straightforward South Polar skua. This is on a beach in Dorset or Devon, I think. Photographed by Peter and Carol Lee. A South Polar skua, surely. And this is the bird on the Isles of Scilly, another South Polar skua, if you saw it. This is the bird in the Yarmouth Museum. Looks like a pretty straightforward South Polar. And this is one I discovered in the British Museum at Tring, Natural History Museum. Thank you to them. So this is a dark, juvenile great skua with a rusty tone. This is a South Polar skua. And this is the specimen we came across, which was collected in Oxfordshire in December at earlier in the 20th century. And if you flip them over, here's the Oxford specimen. This is a South Polar, and this is a juvenile great skua. Well, after all I've told you, what do you think this bird is? So that's enough of that. Fire away and go and find us a South Polar.